Hello guys and welcome back to another PTR boss preview. Today we're looking at the Conclave of the Chosen encounter.
Yes, this fight consists of 4 bosses. You start off with 2 and as one dies, a new one will enter the fight, each time adding a new permanent ability for you to deal with. Fortunately, we were able to see the entire fight during our short time testing, and it is a pretty long encounter with a fair amount of mechanics to explain, so let's jump straight into it.
So to start off, you'll always have the PACU and Gonk aspects. Tanks throughout the fight need to make sure they keep all bosses separated by at least 7 yards, otherwise they'll gain a buff reducing the damage they take and also increasing the damage they deal. DPS throughout the fight, you are going to be tempted to cleave and multi-dot on the bosses, but unless it gives you significant single target DPS gain, it's pointless, as when one boss dies, the other will immediately go back to 100% health and gain a 15% damage increase. Healers, you need to watch out for each time one of the bosses does die, as its death will debuff the entire raid with a hard-hitting dot for 6 seconds. You'll probably want to cooldown for each time a boss dies, just to keep the raid safe. Throughout the fight, you'll also have Kragwar jump onto the furthest player in your raid, and then jump to the next furthest, and then just repeat that until he despawns and comes back at a later time. If you're stood within the landing zone, you'll take a large amount of damage and get knocked back. We had a couple of hunters try and stand at max range, and just try and bait it away from the rest of the raid. Now to start off, we opted to kill PACU first. PACU has a stacking haste increase whenever she hits the same target. This seems to stack endlessly, and as a result this can eventually become a nightmare for the tanks. To start off, we were swapping the bosses to let this buff drop whenever it reached the new tank. However, we later decided to have a melee taunt for a single hit and have the main tank taunt back immediately afterwards. On top of this, PACU will also buff her allies with a large haste increase. You can however dispel this effect. Now the permanent ability from PACU is PACU's Wrath. On a timer, PACU will fly down to a random spot on the outsides of the room and begin to channel winds that deal huge damage to anyone further than 10 yards away from her. You have plenty of time to spot to see where the bird is about to land, and then you can move to her before the winds even start. You want the entire raid, including the tanks, to get inside this circle to keep damage to a minimum. Note that Kragwar can come in at the exact same time that PACU Wrath winds are active. It's just important to continue to watch out for the landing zones, as otherwise with all the other incoming damage, you could potentially be comboed.
So let's move on and talk about the other starting aspect, which is Gonk. At full energy, this guy will hex an enemy, preventing them from doing any attacks or spells for 5 seconds. When this debuff times out, it'll attempt to jump to anyone within the 8-yard targeting circle around that player. This can be dispelled, just make sure that the player is far away from the raid before you do so, or you'll potentially hex half of your raid. Now Gonk will frequently transform into a raptor and begin to channel Wild Maul at the tank. This frontal cone deals massive physical damage over its duration. Make sure you do not stand near the tanks or you will just get destroyed by it, and tanks, you want to make sure you have some form of active mitigation active just to stay healthy. Now the permanent ability from Gonk is his raptors. Multiple raptors will spawn around the room and fixate on random players. If they reach them, they'll deal large melee hits on them. The raptors can be CC'd in almost every way possible unless they get too close to each other. This instead causes them to gain a movement speed increase and become immune to all forms of CC for 5 seconds. Now as a result of this, these guys are a massive DPS priority and need to be swapped to immediately and ideally kited away from each other to prevent them from becoming enraged. Now after you've got the hang of that and you've killed the PACU aspect, Kimball will spawn. Gonk will gain the damage buff, so you'll want to kill him off next.
Now the Kimball aspect only has a single ability, which is Lacerating Claw. This is a cone that deals a large amount of physical damage and applies a stacking long duration dot. You'll want to taunt the bosses to keep these stacks as low as possible. The permanent ability from Kimball is his Leap. On a timer, he'll debuff random members of your raid, and shortly afterwards he'll jump from each debuff player to another until each player has been hit once. When he lands on you, you'll take a burst of physical damage, get knocked down, and also receive a dot. This leap also hits all players within 5 yards around the target, so if you're debuffed, you need to immediately move away from other players to stop them also getting hit by the dot. Once you've managed to kill off Gonk, you'll have the final aspect come forth, which is Akunda.
Now Akunda's aspect will cast Thundering Storm. This deals a large amount of damage to anyone who remains within the 10-yard targeting circle around her when the cast finishes, so you simply just got to be quick to exit the circle. She'll also debuff random members of the raid with Mind Wipe. This magical debuff removes your spells, making you useless for 30 seconds. Healers need to dispel this effect. Akunda's permanent ability debuffs a large amount of the raid, dealing a moderate burst of damage 6 seconds later. Each player also sends out orbs in all directions. Getting hit by an orb deals a burst of damage and also stuns you for 2 seconds. This, on top of all of the other mechanics in play, makes this last section of the fight pretty insane. You gotta nuke down Kimball, while stacking in PACU's Wrath Winds, whilst dodging Kragwa, you gotta kite and kill off Gonk's Raptors, you gotta make sure that Kimball's leap doesn't hit multiple players, whilst dodging incoming orbs, all on top of Kimball and Akunda's aspects mechanics. Now, whilst this isn't so important for all of the other permanent abilities, for the lightning debuff, this is extremely important. When a boss becomes active, their special ability timer starts and doesn't reset, ever, not even when a new boss spawns. This means that if you're reckless with the time in which you kill Gonk, you can potentially overlap PACU's special where you've got to stack up, and the lightning orbs at the exact same time, which means people affected with the debuff will not be able to stack within the safe zone, or they'll just kill everyone with their orbs. To stop this from happening, we decided to make sure that Gonk would die the moment PACU's special began. This offset their timers permanently, making sure that you never saw the overlap. Once you got Kimball down and healers managed to pull through the final dot on the raid, it actually gets pretty easy as you only have Akunda to deal with. Even though you have all 4 permanent abilities going on, it's actually pretty chill for the most part. But that's the encounter. What do we think?
I think it's a really good fight. It's not necessarily the best fight in the instance, but it is definitely a solid encounter. One thing I really like about it is how the fight becomes progressively more hectic. But one thing that they've maybe messed up a little bit is that towards the end, where you just have the Akunda's aspect, is very anticlimactic.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. The hardest part of the fight is where you have the 2 final aspects up and you're killing them, and then once one of them's down, it's like, oh, okay, we killed it. Grats, everyone. Unless, you know, like, it could be really tense if you got, like, half the raid dead or whatever. But if you go into there healthy, there's nothing really that could screw you over, especially considering the overlaps are pretty set at that point.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure what you could necessarily do to fix that. I think even if you just added a stacking dot on the raid that progressively becomes more and more difficult to heal.
Well, on Mythic, they've kind of got that to an extent, haven't they? With the whole curse debuff that's like jumping around and making it so people are healing immune.
On Mythic, it's going to be an extremely tight kill.
Yeah.
How the debuff works on Mythic is that it flat out makes someone immune to healing.
Yep.
And you can dispel the debuff, which removes it from the encounter for about 3 seconds, but then it will randomly just go on a new target. And more of these debuffs are thrown at you throughout the fight. So towards the end of the encounter, you could have, say, 7 or 8 people completely immune to healing, and you don't have 7 or 8 dispels in your raid.
Especially not cursed dispels, unless you're going to stack a bunch of mages or something like that. Talking of stacking mages, actually, talking about PACU, of course, we decided to kill her off first, but of course, that haste buff that she gains, it also applies to the other boss. If you had 2 mages, you could just constantly spell steal that. I saw that in some of the feedback things that maybe, because you can choose which bosses you want to kill in which order. In theory, you could keep PACU alive right until the very end of the fight and just constantly have 2 very fucking happy mages who are just going to constantly spell steal and pretty much get a little mini bloodlust every 20 seconds or so. They'll be so happy. And that's one thing I do like about the fight is that you do have that choice. Maybe you will make different boss choice orders depending on your comp. It probably won't matter so much on normal and heroic, but on mythic, there might be some cheese available there. Yeah. Maybe you're going to see like 4 or 5 mages or stealing it from the raptors, and you're keeping the raptors alive so they can be buffed to feed the mages so they do extra damage.
I mean, it's definitely a possibility.
Yeah, you know, it could be quite fun in that sort of sense.
In terms of other things that's going on with the encounter, I kind of like the way that Kragwa also comes in at the exact same time as a PACU's Wrath.
Oh yeah, they deliberately timed it to be annoying.
Yeah.
Yeah. One thing that's nice, so it seems like his travel speed is somewhat set, so regardless of how close he is, as long as you move as soon as you see the circle underneath your feet, you won't get hit.
Yeah.
Which is perfect. So there's no excuse ever to be hit by this little toady man. But you know that loads of people are going to get hit during a PACU's Wrath. The worst thing is the knockback part of it. Because not only are you just like, you know, sad because you got hit, but then you're just flung into the danger zone and you just die anyway, which is hilarious.
I mean, another thing to say about this encounter as well is that when Blizzard does make these sort of council-style fights, I guess it's not really a council-style fight, but fights where it has multiple bosses, they can have so many mechanics that it can become a little bit overwhelming. I mean, think of things like Klaxi.
Yeah.
Where you've got a list of so many bosses and it can become a little bit confusing as to who does what. But here, they don't have so many mechanics, and the mechanics and spells that the bosses do have available are all meaningful, so you learn them pretty quickly, I think. And that's one thing they've executed very, very well here. They've definitely got that balance right. But thank you very much for watching, guys. That's all we got time for in this video today. If you enjoyed this preview, then do show us some love. Give us a like. We appreciate it. Thank you very much. And we shall see you all in the next one.
Thanks for watching.
Thanks for watching.